In the first case, I think the question that has been deeply misrepresented on so much of the media coverage and the analysis that we've heard in the political arena is this question of legality. Is the decision by the United States and Israel to launch strikes already at the end of February, is that something that can be considered to be lawful? And you will have no doubt seen the resounding chorus of those who are opposed to this military adventure, calling this illegal. And I think it's critical that we stop and take stock both of the context that led up to it, which will help us understand and analyse what the proper legal framework to apply is, but also the broader aspects of self-defence, of resorts to force, and what the recognised international law says about that. The first thing I would start off by explaining is that the law of armed conflict is traditionally separated into two broad areas, two very separate frameworks. One is called jus ad bellum, and it is that framework that governs resorts to force, or indeed the start of a war or an armed conflict. The other is referred to as jus in bello, and jus in bello refers to the laws of armed conflict that govern a war which is ongoing. So once there's been either a declaration of war or war is agreed to have begun, what are the rules, the laws of armed conflict that govern what law-abiding parties, law-respecting armies are able to do within that framework? I want to talk about both of those aspects, but I think it's important to recognise that this is so very different from the law that so many of us are familiar with in a national or even in an international context. The laws of war sit in a very, very different reality, one that unfortunately recognises the inevitability of death and of even innocent civilians being killed in the context of a war. The mechanism and the framework of the laws of armed conflict developed over many decades to seek to minimise the potential loss of civilian life and the destruction to civilian areas as much as possible. But the framework recognises that that can never be eradicated. And so that is a very different mindset, which I would encourage our audience to seek to join me on that journey in switching our mindset. It's one that perhaps comes far easier to military professionals or even historians of military history who are more familiar with the phenomenon of armed conflict, of what it means to go to war and the realities that come with that. It's so far removed from most of our day-to-days that is a very difficult starting point, I think, to get to, and it perhaps explains why so much of the coverage of some of the recent armed conflicts that certainly Western powers have been involved in have been, I would say, so badly misrepresented. And I think journalists in particular, even war correspondents, reflect that sort of Western mentality, which is very far removed from the experience, thankfully, of having been involved in an armed conflict up close and personal. I mean, the Second World War is now, for the most part, outside of our living memory, and I think that does make a significant impact on the ability to understand and relate to what is, frankly, the most chaotic of circumstances that any individual might find themselves in. And it is extraordinary, some might think, that there is in fact a law, a framework that has developed to seek to regulate that chaos and make it as humanitarian as possible for all of those involved. So with that preamble, when we're looking at jus ad bellum, the law that governs a resort to armed force, I think one of the overarching principles in international law more broadly to bear in mind in this instance is that what is referred to as the right to self-defence. This is not bestowed by any international law upon individual states. This is a right which is considered to be inherent especially when I've been speaking to some more religious American audiences, they very much see this as a God-given right. But in any event, it is one that is recognised to be at the centre of every state's responsibilities to its own citizens, to keep those citizens safe, to protect them, and therefore to exercise its lawful self-defence. In the context of this resort to force and the start of armed conflict, it's therefore very, very pertinent to consider one aspect of what has been discussed in relation to US strikes, and that is what has been called preemptive self-defense. It may be recalled that when the United States President Donald Trump gave his initial statement at the start of these very significant US strikes upon Iranian military targets, there was a clear reference to preemption that was taken in response to what you may recall was referred to as an imminent threat. Now, this was often cited in relation to the Iranian nuclear aspirations, and in that respect, subsequent developments and evidence that we heard from Steve Witkoff and others that were involved in the negotiations with the Iranians that were ongoing at that time referenced in particular the Iranian boast, if you will, that they were very close or imminently able to break out to some 11 nuclear weapons. And that is a figure that has subsequently been cited to explain what it was that the president was referring to when he talked about an imminent threat. Now, this question of imminence is a broad concept that has developed over time. The Caroline incident, in which this concept of international law of imminence being a requirement for a preemptive use of self-defense, that really developed in an era where the cannonball was the most advanced military technology, and therefore the definition and the academic commentary around the question of imminence was very different to the sort of writing that we've had in relation to what imminence requires in the era of ballistic missiles and of the ability to immediately fire a missile an extraordinary distance and have a very significant impact with that, or indeed the ability to launch an electronic strike. The introduction of cyber warfare into these considerations of the laws of armed conflict more broadly, but of imminence in particular, have been very significant. And we saw, certainly, in the context of America's war on terror, the concept of imminence being developed, some would even say stretched, so that it was used to justify strikes against terrorist units that were preparing and operating in different parts of the world and threatening the United States and the interests of allies from there. So those are a few words that I hope might give some colour to that debate that was pretty prominent, especially in the first few days at the end of February and into March, given the analysis and the justification that the president gave of preemption. I'm going to respectfully submit to you all that is in fact not relevant to the proper analysis and the, if you will, justification of this war and of the continuation of this war. And I say that because the proper analysis and framework that applies to the strikes that the US and Israel conducted appears to me far more properly to be in that secondary area of the law of armed conflict that I mentioned, jus in bello, the law that governs an ongoing armed conflict. And the reason for that is that the existence of an armed conflict, certainly between Iran and Israel, has been well established for a number of decades. This has, of course, been principally waged over the majority of that time by Iran through its proxies. But more recently, there were, in the course of the development since the 7th of October, two very significant direct strikes by Iran onto, it's important to clarify, Israeli civilian targets for the most part. And those were by drones, by ballistic missiles and other projectiles that the Islamic regime in Iran engaged in directly. Previous attacks, which were indirectly through proxies, included, of course, the 7th of October itself, Hamas being an Iranian proxy, also the strikes upon Israeli, again, civilian targets primarily from Lebanon via Hezbollah, another Iranian proxy, and via the Houthis in Yemen, another Iranian proxy, and other proxies in Iraq and in Syria. All of that is critical, certainly to my mind, in assessing what the status between Israel and Iran has been over this period, and the existence of that ongoing armed conflict is evident from the analysis of the kinetic strikes that were going back and forth, certainly also the rhetoric that we heard from the Islamic regime threatening to wipe Israel off of the map, even indeed including a countdown to that day on a big clock in one of the main squares in Tehran. And that's, as I say, extremely important because it takes us out of the jus ad bellum analysis and into the jus in bello analysis. And in the context of an ongoing armed conflict, the resort to force isn't in question. It is automatically lawful to strike your enemy so long as the other aspects of the laws that regulate ongoing armed conflicts are complied with. I'll give you a brief overview of those and I'll go through them in more detail and explain with some examples. But those key rules of the law of armed conflict that form the jus in bello framework are military necessity, that a target that is struck must only be struck if it is militarily necessary to do so to advance the aims of the armed conflict or the war. The second is this very critical principle of distinction, which means that both the armies in question must distinguish between combatants and civilians. So you must distinguish between your own combatants and your own civilians and ensure that your fighters wear uniform and that your military bases are clearly distinguished from civilian areas. But of course, it also requires a distinction in relation to the targets that you choose to strike. They must be military targets. And therefore it's a very basic rule that any strike upon a civilian building that is directed at a civilian target, which is not being used for military purposes, is necessarily unlawful. That could not be lawful if it is intentionally struck. The third principle here is that of proportionality, and that's possibly the most widely misrepresented rule of customary international law, of the law of armed conflict, full stop. Proportionality is often misrepresented as some sort of casualty counting exercise on both sides and comparing those casualty figures. That is, extremely macabre, but it also entirely misunderstands the framework and the very essence of the law of armed conflict, which is intention-based. It is not effects-based. It is all about what the intention behind a decision or a military strike was, and that is the intention of the military commanders that ordered a strike to be undertaken. So the rule of proportionality and the formulation of it is as follows, that a reasonable military commander must weigh up the anticipated military advantage of a strike against the expected civilian or collateral damage. And that formulation takes into account that there may be many unknowns in the context of this chaotic war scenario. And that's why it's the information that was available to the reasonable military commander when a decision to strike was taken, and the intention of that commander when that decision was taken, that is critical to being able to make this assessment. Some of our audience may indeed be familiar with a film that dealt in some detail with this sort of analysis called Eye in the Sky. I'm given to understand by colleagues in the industry that it is frighteningly accurate as to the decisions and the procedures that are undertaken in relation to these sorts of drone strikes. And indeed, with the introduction of drone warfare, many militaries, modern militaries, law-abiding militaries, have become far better able to make that assessment in real time, of course, because you don't have pilots in the air in the context of the usage of drones, pilots in the air who are under pressure, susceptible perhaps to human error while in the sky, but are also working on a time-sensitive basis. Not so with drone warfare, which has given modern militaries the ability to take far more time in making these assessments and making these decisions. Pretty remarkable, I've always found, that a lot of the conversation about drone warfare has been so negative in terms of the preservation of civilian life, and has viewed this as a sort of additional killing machine, as opposed to what I think you will find if you ask most military personnel involved in the operation of drones, that it in fact allows armies to be far more discriminate and to take far more time and care when conducting this proportionality analysis and selecting targets with the appropriate information that they have available to them. So that's the third principle. And the fourth, which is equally very important, is the principle of precaution. And this requires that modern law-abiding armies take precautions to prevent civilian casualties wherever this might be feasible. In the context of Israel, the IDF has perhaps pioneered some sophisticated and less sophisticated procedures for warning civilians, directing strikes very precisely where possible. Many of you may have already seen footage of an apartment block in which either a single floor or sometimes only a single room out of that apartment block has been struck. That is all very much within the expectations or the requirements of the principle of precaution. Where that is possible, armies have to take those measures that are reasonable. Sometimes they will, of course, also involve warnings, and this will no doubt always be a balance, because when one is warning civilians in an area of a potential strike, it's clear that the enemy is warned of that strike also and has the ability to evacuate combatants, has potentially also the ability to evacuate military equipment, including drone or rocket launching sites, which many of the strikes conducted, certainly by Israel and by the United States in these recent activities, have been targeting. So that's an overview of the four key rules that govern ongoing armed conflicts. And so when we come back to this overarching question of the legal analysis of these strikes by Israel and by the United States on Iranian military targets, starting in February through March, and now perhaps also very much about to pick up again, that is ultimately the question. Once we've established that this is an ongoing armed conflict, are those principles being adhered to? Necessity, distinction, proportionality, and precaution.